April 29th, 2018, a small team of Green Berets and Afghan soldiers were clearing compounds of interest in a village in Kapisa Province, Afghanistan, in hopes of disrupting Taliban networks in the area. But early in the morning on April 30th, they were attacked by 80-plus Taliban fighters who had snuck up on them and completely surrounded the village. The Taliban opened up on the Green Berets with small arms, machine gun, and rocket-propelled grenade fire. The enemy's attack was strategic and well planned. While one group battled the Americans from afar, a second group moved in close from the west and threw hand grenades over the compound walls. The Green Berets were getting absolutely hammered from all sides and were at great risk of being overrun. But thankfully, a pair of F-16s were about to bring some red-hot American justice down on the Taliban soldiers. The F-16s were the closest air support in the area, so when they got the radio call from Senior Airman Justin Prack, the Air Force combat controller embedded with the Green Berets in combat, they immediately responded. When the F-16s arrived on target, they found an absolute nightmare below them. Communications were initially very spotty, and in close quarters fighting, it was almost impossible to make out who was who. So Major Colony decided to kick things off by doing a few show of force passes right over the top of the enemy in order to get a better look at things and also to intimidate the enemy fighters. The roar of the F-16's engine flying over the top of the enemy forced them all to get as low to the ground as they possibly could as dirt and dust and debris was kicked up all over them, giving the Green Berets a little bit of breathing room. But more importantly, it gave Colony a good look at the situation on the ground, and he now knew exactly where the enemy was and, more importantly, where his boys were. The two F-16s then quickly circled back around and did a few high-angle strafes with their 20mm Vulcan cannons. For F-16s, high-angle strafes actually allow for a better grouping of shots than low-angle strafes, and obviously that accuracy is incredibly important in a close-quarters fighting situation like this one. After just a few strafing runs with the 20mm cannons, the enemy pulled back to a nearby ridgeline, which meant they were now far enough away from the Green Berets for the F-16s to bring out the big guns. The F-16s then circled back around again and dropped multiple 500-pound GBU-38 bombs right on the heads of the enemy soldiers.
G25 looks like good hits. Give me about 30 seconds for the dust to clear. No, that was dangerous.
Destroying numerous enemy positions and sending such a powerful blast wave through the village that it blew out all the windows. The F-16s bought some time for the troops on the ground, but the crisis was far from over. Friendly forces had 8 injured soldiers who desperately needed medical evacuation, but heavy enemy fire prevented any helicopters from flying in to pick them up. It was decided that the best move was for the ground troops to hunker down in a single compound on the far side of the village, but they would have to charge down 100 meters of open road to get there. By now, close air support helicopters, observation aircraft, and aerial refueling tankers had also arrived on station, and it was Colony's job to fill them all in on what was happening. With one eye on the ground and another in the air, the pilot coordinated the busy airspace while working with Prack, the Air Force combat controller, and his wingman to set up attack runs. Each attack brought great stress and discomfort to Colony as he tried to keep track of both enemy and friendly positions while he coordinated all aerial attacks. But somehow, after 12 straight hours of non-stop fighting, the friendly ground troops managed to get to the compound and get medevaced. One soldier, Gabriel Conde, tragically lost his life in the battle, and 11 more were injured. But things would have been a heck of a lot worse if Colony and his wingman had not been there. And Michael Colony received the Distinguished Flying Cross for his heroic actions that day. And if you think F-16s are terrifying, wait until you see what an A-10 Thunderbolt can do when it drops over 16,000 pounds of ammunition in this next clip. On April 23, 2011, a U.S. Army helicopter crashed in an area swarming with armed hostiles in Kapisa Province, Afghanistan. As soon as the calls about the helicopter crash came over the radio, the 83rd Expeditionary Squadron at Bagram Airfield sent out 2 Air Force Pavehawk helicopters to respond to the crash. Their call signs were Pedro 83 and Pedro 84. Pedro 83 carried 3 pararescuemen, and Pedro 84 carried 2. Upon arrival at the crash site, the Pavehawks immediately started taking fire from the enemy. In the chaos, Pedro 83 somehow spotted one of the pilots who had crawled up onto a ridge about 300 meters uphill from the crash site. And despite small arms fire still slamming into the side of the helicopter, Pedro 83 managed to lower its 3 pararescuemen onto the ridge. Meanwhile, Pedro 84, who was also under heavy fire from the enemy, dropped its 2 pararescuemen, Staff Sergeants Zachary Klein and Bill Senna, as close to the crash site as possible. At the crash site, the 2 PJs found that the pilot had unfortunately passed away, and they started preparing to hoist him out and into their Pavehawk. But unfortunately, the enemy wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. Right after dropping Klein and Senna on the ground, Pedro 84's flight engineer was shot in the leg, and the Pavehawk had to fly back to Bagram to get him medical attention. Enemy fire also forced Pedro 83 to cut its hoist cable and do a daring one-wheel hover in the combat zone just to get its 3 PJs and the surviving pilot back aboard. And that left Klein and Senna stuck on the ground in the combat zone alone with the fallen pilot. But thankfully, they weren't alone for long, as an AH-64 Apache helicopter arrived on target and started providing air cover.
Alright, you got him? Okay, pushing in here, that's where he's sparkling right here.
Yeah,
there they are.
Alright, was done.
There. Okay.
Yep, engage.
Okay.
Fire, we have contact.
Okay. Firing.
Where you at? Approaching 27.
Engage.
Keep firing.
This is 3 Alpha. You're hitting the guys with the RPGs right now.
Okay, engage.
Engage.
Okay, there's one more guy down here.
Okay, 30 millimeters getting shot at.
Keep looking for movement.
Cobra, Slasher 02.
Good range focus.
Are you clear? Can we come in with a pistol?
No, negative. Do not shoot. You got friendlies pretty close to where the.
You see where they're shooting at right now, Finesse?
Got movement.
Alright, engage.
Engaging.
Cobra, Slasher 02.
Got him.
At this point, the 2 PJs along with the fallen pilot were taking cover behind some big rocks near the crash site when they noticed the fire at the crash site started spreading and getting bigger. Thankfully, Klein spotted a rocket pod that was still full of unexploded rockets attached to the side of the helicopter, and he made the very wise judgment call to get the heck away from the crash site. Thankfully, the Apache overhead was able to give them enough cover fire for them to sprint from the rocks to a nearby ravine, and as they were sprinting away from the crash site, the helicopter exploded. Thankfully, the PJs weren't wounded by the explosion, but bits of molten metal can still be found on Klein's body armor to this day. The PJs were now taking cover in the ravine, but the situation was getting worse. Despite the Apache gunship's best efforts, the enemy was closing in on their position, and the ravine was offering them very little cover. But thankfully, the cavalry was almost there. Captain Rustin Trainham and Captain Mike Hilkert, both of the 74th Expeditionary Rescue Squadron, were off supporting other ground forces nearby when a call for help came over the guard frequency. Using the guard frequency is a sacred thing, a last resort, and a true sign that things are really bad and someone needs help now. So as soon as Hilkert and Trainham received the call over the guard frequency from the two PJs, they raced to their location in their A-10 Thunderbolts. As soon as the A-10s arrived on target, they began surveying the area to figure out where the PJs were located and where the enemy was located. At the same time, Hilkert began setting up airspace restrictions and communications relays to the Air Support Operations Center, the Combined Air Operations Center, and Joint Personnel Recovery Center. They also shot rockets into the valley to give Klein and Senna some breathing room, but it didn't last long. Despite the A-10s absolutely hammering the enemy for half an hour, the PJs were now pinned down by close-range heavy machine gun fire. Hilkert's A-10 was running low on fuel, so he hooked up to an aerial refueling tanker that was flying over the target location. And hooking up to a refueling tanker is not an easy task. It requires a ton of skill and focus, but it didn't take Hilkert out of the fight. While he was hooking up to the refueling tanker to get more fuel, he was still marking targets just 50 meters away from Klein and Senna's position. With the enemy's exact danger close location now marked, Hilkert's wingman was able to open up with his 30mm cannons, saving Klein's and Senna's lives. Later that morning, a 32-man Army Quick Reaction Force landed at two locations on the battlefield and was immediately attacked. One soldier was killed and several more were wounded. At this point, Hilkert was in complete control of coordinating all air support in the area. He was marking enemy positions while simultaneously monitoring and marking the locations of one half of the QRF with his binoculars and the other with his targeting pods to ensure that all the aircraft in the area knew exactly where the friendlies were so they could lay down fire on the enemy without risk of hitting friendlies. All in all, Hilkert used 37 different radio frequencies to coordinate 21 aircraft, all while flying his own aircraft and engaging enemy targets. And if that wasn't enough, when a handful of Pavehawks and Apache helicopters eventually moved in to evacuate the wounded Quick Reaction Force soldiers, Hilkert flew his A-10 between the helicopters and the enemy multiple times, drawing all of the enemy's fire onto himself and his aircraft and away from the helicopters. And thanks to his incredibly heroic actions, literally using himself and his aircraft as a shield for his teammates, the helicopters were able to evacuate the wounded soldiers. And at this point in the battle, Hilkert had been in the cockpit of his A-10 for over 10 straight hours. But thankfully, Hilkert didn't have to stay and see this mission all the way through, as Pedro 84 returned to the combat zone to pick up the two pararescuemen and the fallen pilot. But this time, Pedro 84 brought backup. 4 fully loaded A-10 Thunderbolts came in right behind Pedro 84 to replace Hilkert. And with the A-10s completely obliterating what was left of the enemy force, Pedro 84 was able to successfully recover the pararescuemen and the fallen pilot. Overall, Hilkert helped secure 2 landing zones, rescue 2 pararescuemen, recover the fallen pilot, and evacuate 32 QRF soldiers. And for his heroic actions that day, Hilkert was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross.